By the time Alexander the Great died in 323 BC at the age of 32, the Roman Republic was a regional Italian power too irrelevant for Alexander to even concern himself with. While some evidence exists that Alexander may have considered an invasion of Italy in the future, it certainly never materialized before his untimely demise. But what if he did try to conquer Rome? Well, Rome was undoubtedly on the ascendancy by the 320s BC, and in the middle of a 50-year conflict with its Samnite rivals that would see the young republic emerge as the dominant military and political entity on the Italian peninsula. But at this stage, Rome would have found itself face to face with a Macedonian empire that had brought the great Shahs of Persia to heel and conquered territories spanning from the deserts of Egypt to the river deltas of northwestern India. Now, interestingly enough, the question of what would have been the result for Rome if she had been engaged in war with Alexander had already been asked 2000 years before our time by the famous Roman historian Livy in his book Ab Urbe Condita, or Of the Founding of the City. So, what does Livy believe and how does he make his case? Now, Livy basically starts his reasoning in chapter 17 of book 9 of Ab Urbe Condita by trash-talking Alexander. While he acknowledges Alexander as an exceptional general, he also argues that his reputation was over-exaggerated by the fact that he died young and before he could suffer any change of fortune. He claims that Roman military commanders of the time, such as Marcus Valerius Corvus or Fabius, were equal to Alexander in military prowess, courage and ability, owing to Rome's unbroken martial tradition. According to Livy, Alexander, with his military career of only around 10 years, would have failed to defeat Rome's seasoned veteran generals. Yet Alexander had remained undefeated his entire life against seasoned Persian generals. Alexander was a virtuoso in military strategy, known to invent creative tactical maneuvers that allowed him to outsmart and crush much larger and more powerful armies consistently. He also inspired a unique loyalty and devotion in his men due to his famous charisma. Roman generals of the early Republican era, on the other hand, were notoriously stubborn and straightforward, resulting in repeated heavy defeats to the Samnites before their final triumph over them, and of course heavy losses to Carthage a century later. It is hard to imagine that Roman generals of the time, as talented as they were, would have succeeded in outsmarting Alexander, especially since their forces would likely have been smaller than those of Macedon. Livy then continues in chapter 18 by attacking Alexander's character, and highlights the flaws that he thinks would have led him to defeat against the nascent Roman Republic. He argues that Alexander's early successes may have contributed to a lack of maturity, leading to impulsive behavior, overconfidence, and poor decision-making later in life. Livy goes so far as to claim that had Alexander grown older, these flaws would have become even more pronounced with old age. Now, it is well known that Alexander was a flawed man. He was prone to frequent and rather violent fits of rage, especially when he felt disrespected. A notable incident that shows this was his killing of his decade-long companion Cletus the Black, who he murdered in a drunken rage after the latter had criticized him. While Alexander later bitterly regretted this, as Cletus was the husband of his childhood wet nurse and had personally saved Alexander's life at the Battle of Granicus 6 years earlier, it shows that Alexander's hot-headedness was undoubtedly a major character flaw of his. And yet, this line of reasoning by Livy is entirely speculative. If anything, we have ample evidence that Alexander's impulsive nature and aggressiveness were key to his success and had led him to triumph at decisive battles, such as that of Gaugamela in 331 BC. In reality, this point is also in contradiction to the one before. It makes no sense to highlight Alexander's youth and lack of experience, only to then claim that his negative traits would have become more pronounced with age. Would the same not apply to his positive traits? Finally, in chapter 19, Livy claims that the Roman army was superior to that of Macedon in both size and quality. He argues that while Alexander might have been able to bring 30,000 Macedonian veterans to Italy, Rome could muster far more men very quickly. He continues by highlighting the Roman army's greater experience as well as its superior organization. Now, this point is almost silly. It is laughable to assume that Alexander, who invaded Persia with around 40,000 to 50,000 men drawn from Greece alone, would have brought fewer men to Italy when he had access to a pool of manpower of an empire roughly 35 times the size of Greece. When it comes to military experience, the Roman army was undoubtedly experienced from fighting its neighbors. This applied to the same and perhaps even a greater extent to the Macedonian army. Several Macedonian soldiers were veterans of over 20 years of warfare, such as the aforementioned Cletus the Black, who had served Alexander's father Philip II of Macedon when Alexander was still a child. In terms of organization, this period of Roman history marked the point when the Roman army began shifting from a rigid phalanx formation to a more flexible manipular system. Now, this manipular system obviously proved very successful in defeating the phalanxes of Hellenic kingdoms in later centuries, but was it developed enough to beat Alexander's professional army? Well, it's difficult to say. What is probably fair to assume is that Alexander's overwhelming numbers, as well as his notorious creativity and ability to adapt to his enemy's battle tactics, would have proven too much for the manipular Roman Republican army to overcome. So what should we make of all this? Well, firstly, it's important to remember that Ab Urbe Condita is a Roman propaganda piece, intended to embellish Roman history. What is further relevant is the time period it was written in. Livy lived during the reign of Augustus, one of the golden ages of Rome. It is likely that the huge and powerful Roman Empire he witnessed during his lifetime led him to overestimating the capabilities of the young Roman Republic of the late 4th century BC. Now, to answer our initial question, could Rome have withstood a Macedonian invasion? Well, we can't say for certain, but probably no. Alexander's strategic and tactical genius, as well as Macedon's overwhelming resources and manpower at this point, certainly tipped the scales of power more in favor of Macedon than any of Livy's arguments do for Rome. But what do you think? Could Rome have withstood Alexander and continued its rise to the dominant power of European antiquity? Let us know in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe and let us know what video you would like to see next.